Thanks for coming out, especially in lieu of all of the chaos with Helene and Milton. So we're so happy to have you join us tonight. I will get right to it. I will introduce you to the authors of the hour. And I am reading from my phone because of Wi-Fi problems, so please excuse me. Okay, Tyler Gillespie is the author of the nonfiction collection, The Thing About Florida, Exploring a Misunderstood State, and 2 poetry collections, The Nature Machine and Florida Man, Poems Revisited. He is represented by Lauren McLeod, a former journalist. His reporting appears in Rolling Stone, The Guardian, GQ, Vice, The Daily Beast, Playboy, and other outlets. He's the co-editor of The Awkward Phase, and his humor writing can be found in The New Yorker, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, and LGBTQ comedic monologues that are actually funny. And he will be in conversation, of course, with, I set this up to say your name last, so I'm gonna read it how I wrote it. She went from medical school flunky to line cook to journalist to author. She spent 18 years as a food writer, editor, and restaurant critic for the news press in her hometown of Fort Myers, Florida. Her writing has appeared in the Washington Post, USA Today, Catapult, the Tampa Bay Times, and many more publications. She has won more than a dozen awards for her stories, including first place for features writing from the Florida Society of News Editors in 2020. She is the author of the book that you've got to get today, The Mango Tree, a memoir of fruit, Florida, and felony. Let's welcome Annabelle Tometich.
So first of all, I asked Tyler to be here because he is an amazing poet who I very much admire, and I think after the events of these last couple of weeks, all the stress that everybody's been through, I was like, I need more Florida people around me. But yeah, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself and your work.
Hello, there we go. Thank you all for coming out. So we're gonna start with a little bit of reading from each of our work. I'm actually not gonna read from my book, this book that I just published. I am gonna read an essay though that is published by the same press. I'm just gonna read 2 sections from it. So I've been really obsessed with The Creature from the Black Lagoon for a little while. And so this essay is called Portrait with Creature from the Black Lagoon. I look for the creature in a Florida spring, but I don't see any signs of him. There's no gilled body in the hydrilla, no webbed hands in the sand. Instead, I see other creatures. A turtle glides toward the dock, a fish jumps like a skipping stone. 2 manatees float far outside the swim zone. Everyone knows Florida for its beaches, but those of us who have lived here long enough know its springs hold magic too. My poet and artist friend Eleanor and I are on a summer book tour. We stopped at the Wakulla Springs Lodge on our way from Gainesville to Atlanta. A financier built this lodge in the 1930s, and it still holds old school elegance with local cypress columns and wildlife scenes ornately painted on ceiling tiles. I was told filmmakers shot the iconic horror film Creature from the Black Lagoon here in the 1950s. Eleanor and I are at the top of the spring's 20-foot tower plunge. She's less worried about the creature and more concerned with the threat of alligators. Signs around the spring warn visitors not to feed the ancient reptiles. I jump from the ledge and briefly fly like the vultures that circle overhead. My entrance into the water feels spiritual or healing, as these springs have been marketed throughout the state's history. Florida has over 1,000 springs, the largest volume in the world. The water stays around 72 degrees. Its coldness makes my teeth chatter, yet thankful to live in this state. Lately, it's been difficult for many Floridians to feel grateful to live here. The summer has brought a montage of bands, of books, of bodies. Pride events were canceled in some Florida cities because of new ordinances on drag performances. The NAACP issued a travel advisory to the state because they deemed it openly hostile toward African Americans and people of color and LGBTQ+ individuals. Members of the LGBTQ+ community started to leave. They didn't feel safe in the state. I've written about my home state for over a decade, and people have long asked me, what's going on down here? But the summer made them apprehensive. They wanted to know when, not if, I was going to leave the state. Their questions made me think about the Floridians who lived here before us. I'd been working on a series of essays about Florida's state-sanctioned homophobia, from the Johns Committee in the 1950s to Anita Bryant's Save Our Children campaign in the 70s to now. I tracked this Florida lineage and ways the state's LGBTQ+ communities had withstood these waves. So now I'm gonna skip a little bit ahead. I talk about Gilman being a queer icon and basically a monster who I think is in drag. So I'm gonna skip a little bit ahead. So then basically I'm also talking about, like I was drawing Gilman and all this stuff. So people have interpreted sad, beautiful monsters like Gilman and Mothman and Bigfoot as metaphors for queerness. These creatures are ostracized and lonely. They scare people just by existing. But I'm not scared by Gilman, and neither was Kay in the original movie. So I want to imagine a different ending for him. The men do not shoot him in this ending. He becomes friends with Kay. Over brunch, they drink mimosas and decide to go on an epic road trip. They plan to stop at all the little Florida cities with their bougainvillea and old school charm. Gilman is a Capricorn, and Kay is a Libra. So he books all the hotels for them. They pack her electric car and drive for miles as they talk about art and listen to Taylor Swift's discography. At charging stations, they read poetry aloud to each other and share organic cheese puffs. I'm gonna skip this part.
That makes me want to hear it more.
Sounds like you're getting a good part.
We'll share a link later.
We'll share a link, yes, exactly. After their road trip, the two share memes with each other on Instagram. They go to dinner in the city, talk about local fertility options. One day, Kay tells Gilman, hey, I think there's this cool guy you should meet. She introduces him to me. He's of course my type, beautiful, mysterious, complicated, just like Florida. On our first date, we go to this cute coffee shop with a piano in the corner. A kid bangs on the keys in an annoying way, but neither of us notice. We're too busy talking about the new art house film starring our friend Kay. Her most recent performance has garnered award buzz. The first summer rain comes. I use its mud and the sticks from my failed relationship to make us a home. I grill seaweed on the barbecue. When Gilman gets there, I rub his flippers while he laughs at my jokes. He tells me I'm beautiful. I tell him he is too. The future comes. Our sticks withstand all the waves and the hurricanes and whatever else they come our way. Our love is ours. That's all we ever want it to be. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna take us. Is this? I'm good.
It
Yes.
sounds
Yeah.
different though.
Okay. It does sound. Hello.
You want to
That's
just use
all.
this one?
Oh yeah. I'll
Yeah.
just use one. Okay, that's better.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll take us to another very Florida place, which is the inside of a courtroom. Just a slight transition from the springs and the creatures to some different creatures. So this is just the very first page of the mango tree, and it's called The Pit. Rows of orange people sit handcuffed in a beige room. One of them is my mother. I squint at the TV that the bailiff has rolled in on a cart. The people aren't orange, their jumpsuits are. My shoulder presses against my sister's on the hardwood bench we share, our legs shaking in unison as the heels of our stilettos patter urgently against the courtroom's marble floor. A mix of nerves and shivers fueled by the pounding midsummer air conditioning. I tilt my head at the screen, trying to figure out which of these neon uniforms contains our mother, trying to confirm this is real. Mom is on closed-circuit television and not here in person, which blurs that confirmation. She's not Mom, she's TV Mom, fuzzy and orange like a peach, or the flesh of a mango. First appearance hearings aren't like they look on Law & Order. There was no perp walk today. No flashing cameras or microphone-pushing reporters as we ducked our faces in shame. It's just me and Amber, sitting in a half-empty courtroom with my friend who's our attorney, and this blurry flat screen that plays our new reality. It shows a room speckled with inmates in the jail on the other side of the railroad tracks. These potential criminals are kept separate from us, the law-abiding do-gooders who make up this downtown courtroom. They are not like us. We are not like them. And I'll just stop there because I like to keep it just the one page.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then we'll transition to the audience question. But I guess I'll start with, so the story really starts when your mom, who was 64 at the time, right, was arrested. Do you want to tell the story?
Yeah, so how we ended up in that courtroom.
Yes, exactly.
It was 2015. My mother was arrested for shooting at a man with her BB gun, which is a very important detail. It was a BB gun. Because had it been classified, actually, so the charge was firing a missile into an occupied dwelling, vehicle, building, or aircraft, which sounds very assassiny, like
right.
very like bazooka on the shoulder kind of a thing. But thankfully, it was that charge, and it was not classified as a firearm, because firearm would have invoked the 1020 life, Florida's mandatory minimum laws. So had it been classified as a firearm, she would have been charged with, she would have been facing 20 years mandatory minimum in prison. But she was defending her mango trees. She left my son's 5th birthday party. She says she got home. She says there was a man loading all of her mangoes into his truck, and that she, told him to give her mangoes back, and that he was not interested in that. And so she went inside to get her BB gun, which she usually used to snipe the squirrels that would also steal her mangoes. And her goal was to shoot out his tires with her BB gun, which is ambitious at best. Right. But she missed, and she shot out the rear window of his truck. And then he sped off and called the police on her. Right. And that was how we ended up in the courtroom.
And you're working as a reporter.
Yeah.
And so how did you get the news, and then how did you decide to write about it
in
the way that you did?
Yeah. So I guess I can read that part, because that's the end of the very first section that I have kind of pulled up here. If we fast forward a little bit through that very first chapter, I was working as a restaurant critic at the News Press / food writer at the time. Andrew is also a former News Press person. And I get a phone call, and it's our breaking news reporter, Mike Braun. And I was like, "Hi, Mike, what can I do you for?" And he was like, "Is this your mom?" And he's like, "I'm going through this stuff, and it's Josephina Tometich. Is that your mother?" And I was like, "Damn it, you are really good at your job. Like, you were very quick on this." And so I was literally sitting outside the courtroom as I get this phone call from our breaking news reporter. So this is a conversation, as I recall it in the book, me talking to Mike. I shook my head and tried to collect my thoughts, reorganize them, layer this new narrative carefully into the structure of my painstakingly curated life. "That's my kooky mama," I said, trying to keep my tone cheerful, trying to be the same upbeat person I expect myself to be. The girl who can roll with the punches, the one Tometich who never loses her cool, certainly not over a mango. "I'm so sorry, Annabelle." My colleague sounded calm, businesslike. I tried to match his tone, but couldn't. "You have to write something, huh?" The question came out despite my best efforts. "I mean, of course you have to, but it's like a thing then, like a sure thing," I stammered. "There will definitely be a story." Each word was a statement and a question, a certainty rimmed with foolish hope. There was a half-beat of silence, and then I went on, rushing through the rest because this phone call was just a courtesy. The story would be written, I would not get a say. "Yeah, of course there will be, I know how it works," I said. "I just, please be fair. I know you'll be fair, so yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the call." "Of course," my colleague said, sounding like every teacher and adult figure from my childhood, patient and level-headed as they gauged my ability to handle what stood in front of me. Business over, his tone softened. "Is your mom okay? Did she really shoot at that guy over a mango?" My head nodded. "Of course she did," I wanted to say. "You have no idea what that tree means to her." Instead, I stayed silent. This isn't the kind of thing that can be explained over the phone. I thought about the right way to answer. I kept it short, cool, honest. "It's complicated," I said, and I meant it. So that gets us to the end of the first chapter.
Yeah.
So I remember when I first read that, it was so detailed, and it's like such a impactful opening. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process, because you're so good with the details too, and like you really set that up. What is your process for writing like a memoir? I mean, or like a little bit of the insight into that.
Yeah. So it's funny because this book it was not a memoir for a very long time. It was a cookbook. But this one chapter, that first chapter that I just read from, is the one thing that like started kind of all of it. It's like I knew just the absurdity of that whole day of like getting the phone call from the sheriff's office, or getting the phone call from my mother in jail. That waking up to that is fun. The day after your kid's 5th birthday party. And then, going to this first appearance hearing, sitting in the parking lot, getting the call from my newspaper where I work, kind of understanding like where this is going, and that it's not going to be like the quiet little thing that I hoped it might be. I think that always kind of stuck with me of like something I wanted to write in some capacity. And I was like, maybe it'll be something like a column I do for the paper one day or something, or a series I do. Because I really was not thinking of writing a memoir. And then this idea kind of struck that I should write a cookbook. Part of that was the fact that I was offered a job at the Tampa Bay Times to be their food writer, critic person. The Times critic, Laura Riley, had just gone to the Washington Post, which is how journalism works. Like you start in a small market like Fort Myers, you go to a larger market like Tampa, and then bigger doors open nationally if you're good at what you do. And I was so excited at the opportunity for the Tampa Bay Times job, and then the reality of it was that it just didn't make sense at the time. And so I turned down that job, and then this kind of midlife spiral, I was 39, started of like, what the hell are you doing with your life? Like, what is going on? And that was when the cookbook idea struck, of like these kind of quirky essays about this interesting childhood I had, and this overbearing mother, and these odd ways she handles her problems, but then interspersed with these like funny recipes that like were kind of tangential to the stories. Mm-hmm. And the very first chapter originally, this is called The Pit now, the chapter I just read from, but it was called The Mango Shooter at first. Mm-hmm. And my goal was to write, this very stressful, weird day, and then to end it with a cocktail recipe for a mango shooter. Because in 2015, if you Googled mango shooter, the first result you got was the story that Mike Braun wrote in the news press with my mother's mugshot and everything right there. Yeah. And the second result you got was an absolute vodka cocktail for a mango shooter. And I was like, well, that's just funny. Yeah. And it's gonna get funnier as you move farther and farther away from this in time. And it was it wasn't even a recipe. It was like, drink a shot of vodka, eat a piece of mango. And I was like, we could do better than that, Like we can make this classier. We can classy this up a bit. And so that was kind of like the start of it. And I had this kind of very rough thing that didn't make a lot of sense. And I queried some agents with it, and none of them knew what it was, because I also didn't know what it was. And very early on, a good friend of mine who is a writer and a memoirist she's like, I appreciate the recipes, I see what you're doing. You get rid of the recipes and connect the essays, you have a really strong memoir. And I was like, but I'm writing a cookbook. She's like, no, you're not. Nice try. So, yeah.
Can you both talk about, you mentioned, when you Googled mango shooter, your mom, first thing that comes up. And it reminds me a lot of course, the Florida Man, which, you write a lot about the Florida Man in that way. But I think there is that inclination, right, to like reclaim the Florida Man, or reclaim what you take your mom's mugshot and turn it into something else. Yeah. Can you both talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly kind of like, once I got into what the book was, I was like, oh, like, this is kind of the chance to rewrite this story and to give it like the detail and the nuance that it never had when it was just kind of a Florida woman headline, And I think that was like very empowering, of like, oh, well, this is like, your chance to do that, and to kind of not right the wrongs, but like at least give details to the wrongs. But I love your Florida Man work, so I want you to talk more.
I love that question, thank you, because I do see, like, when I was reading your work, I see how we're kind of related and like connected in that kind of way from our own different point of view. I'm writing about myself, and I can't imagine like writing about my mom. Like, that's just a whole different like tenderness, I think. So just a little bit of a background on me, like, well, I write about it, so whatever. I got arrested in a mall parking lot for DUI when I was 18. And I'm like, if that would have been, that was in like 2005, if that would have been like 5 years later, that could have very easily been a Florida man headline, right? Like, Florida man arrested in mall parking lot, whatever. So I was really interested in this idea about like, you know, how I have an opportunity to contextualize via my work and my writing that a lot of people don't. And one of my friends, not she wasn't like a Florida woman necessarily, but, you know, we'll go into a job interview and someone had printed out her mugshots, like just unnecessarily cruel things that people do, you know, because of the headlines and everything. So I came at it from that point of view. And like one of my cousin was like, called the cops on her drug dealer because her drug dealer tried to rob her, you know what I mean? Like, stuff like that, which
It's hot down here.
It's hot. But like, I just think about the worst moment of my life being the only thing that people would like know me for is really sad. And so I wrote about someone who took the worst moment of her life, and like she was like deeply in like drugs and alcohol, and anyway she used it to get sober and like had a whole life after that headline where now she's like helping people in recovery. And those are kind of the Florida stories that I'm the most interested in, like what happens next. So writing about myself was, I had control, but I'm wondering like writing about like your mom and like the tenderness and like how, you know, did you approach that?
It's funny, I never really I didn't realize I'd written a mother-daughter memoir until my agent told me. And she's like, well, here are the comps. These are all the other mother-daughter memoirs that are just like yours. And I was like, wait, what? And she's like, yeah, like Crying in H Mart. And, you know, she just went down this kind of list of like, and I was like, this isn't really a mother-daughter. And then I was like, oh my gosh, of course it is, like, duh. But in my head, it was just like a childhood coming of age story, you know, and I didn't realize like how hugely my mother factored into all of it until it kind of was all written together and was like, oh yeah, there's a lot of mom in there. And then, I mean, you know, it was a single parent household. My father died when I was young. And so, you know, it was mom, and then it was me as like parent number two, you know? So I think, you know, I was like a co-parent in so many ways, being the eldest daughter and, you know, having a widowed mother and things like that, that like, when I set out to write this, like, I just really didn't realize how much of my mother was there until it was there. And I almost am grateful that I didn't set out to write, you know, I didn't go like, okay, mother-daughter memoir, gotta focus on, you know, it was just kind of like that was what the story was. And then after the fact, it was like, oh crap, yeah, that's what this is.
Can you talk a bit about what the mango tree meant to your mom, and how that, I feel like that kind of ties into the immigrant experience, right? Because it wasn't just a mango tree.
Oh, it was not just a mango tree, yeah. And that was also the thing, like when people were first like, she shot a man over mangoes, like I was the one who was like, well, yeah, of course she did. Like, did you not get it? And no, like people didn't necessarily understand it. So yeah, I mean, that was, oh yeah.
I've been wanting to ask this from the very beginning. You never let us know why he wasn't arrested for stealing.
Yeah.
What happened there?
So he fled. Again, I think my mother would tell me the truth at least. She says he fled with a truckload of mangoes, maybe like half a truck full of mangoes. The story he told to the police and what's in the official police report is that he saw a mango, the most perfect, let's go back. He was just gotten married on Annabelle supposedly, and was taking his like newlywed bride home from their nuptials and going back to his place on Palm Beach Boulevard, and had passed the perfect mango sitting in the middle of the road, not on anyone's property, and that he bent over to pick up the mango, and this crazy woman came out with her rifle and threatened to kill him. So that is his version of the story. The problem, because Florida is Florida and we have stand your ground laws, whatever you think on those, is that my mother waited too long. He was off of her property. He was driving away. The police said that he posed no direct threat to her because of the fact that she shot out his rear window as he was driving away. So she was the one who was arrested. And also, by the time he was talking to the police, he did not have mangoes in his car, but we always we're like, could we hire a forensic mango pathologist to go sweep that car for mango remnants? Because I think you're gonna find lots of them in there.
Everybody look in the fridge.
I know, yeah. But no, I mean, the tree was everything to my mother, and it was like her yard. It was kind of the start of that jungle of a yard of hers was that very first mango tree, and it became kind of a very convenient tool of okay, well, if we just start the story of why was the tree planted, when it grew, and then the ending ended up being a little bit different, but the tree came down in Hurricane Irma. And I mean, it didn't a lot of mango trees fall over, the roots come up and they get uprooted, but this was snapped, it snapped in half. And I remember going to the house and we couldn't figure out what was going on because it just didn't look right. Nothing looked right, but I was oh my gosh, the mango tree's gone. And it snapped in half at its trunk. And so that became I was okay, well, we have a beginning, we have a middle, and we have an end, and it's all this tree. Yeah. Do you grew up in the Panhandle?
I grew up in Largo,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
just in Largo in Pinellas County.
Oh, I gotcha. For some reason, but your grandmother's in the Panhandle. Who's in the Panhandle?
I'm trying to think of anyone.
Yeah.
More Gainesville area.
Oh,
Yeah.
You have mangoes here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Tyler, I have a question for you. And really both of you, with we were talking about your desire to shift the narrative of the Florida woman story and make it. So with Florida, we talk a lot about all these things that we have problems with, but then at the same time we talk about this love-hate relationship. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it shows in your writing, both of you?
Yes. I think I just I was thinking about this earlier. I just really love Florida. I don't actually hate it. I hate some of the, admit it,
The octave switches.
right. We're being recorded. Some of its policies, which of course, I don't know. I mean, it's Florida because of the way that the state has been marketed and how it attracts people, and kind of a lot of the work that I was doing was how did people come to Florida because it's so populated now compared to what it was, right? So I do, I guess, hate it, but I also just feel I just love it. Hating Florida is hating myself, right? Which I do, but for different reasons, right? I don't know, I'm really focusing on my love for Florida right now. That doesn't mean I don't want to leave. But anyway, I'm trying to think about, okay. So I was writing a lot about Florida Man, and I have a couple books where I'm writing nonfiction, and the poems are contextualizing. And so people ask me, the New York Times recently, there was the Florida Man Games that happened recently, and they interviewed me about it, and I'm I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the housing crisis. I want to talk about hurricane, infrastructure things. So I want to have those kind of conversations, about real, people that actually live here, and not kind of this bigger narrative, which is really, I don't know why it so persists, because we've been writing against it for so long, for a while, this current contemporary writers, I think, are really writing away from that, a lot of the interesting work. But I think that for me, it's mostly about focusing on the things that I love, because I work a lot out of, that's where I find energy. If I'm hating something, I just want to leave it, so I'm trying to focus on what I love about it, especially after something as horrific as this climate disaster that's happening,
Yeah, turning something from a caricature into a portrait.
Florida's just what I know, it's just it's where my people are, it's where my family is, it's where my chosen family is, and that's hard to leave behind, but 3 hurricanes in 2 years makes you reconsider all of that. It's such a tricky place down here, because it's everyone's a little bit drunk on sunshine. There's a lot of that. You get, I think in our little cul-de-sac we've had the neighbors just across the street are from Oklahoma, people next door are from Vermont, like New England area. It was an Airbnb for a while, but like a longer term Airbnb. So we had like Canadians there for a little bit, people from New Jersey, and they're all coming down for their different reasons. And so you get these kind of like these pictures and these ideas and these little vignettes of like these people who choose to come here for at this stage, which I guess this stage is not even the 5 years ago stage, but and I'm curious, I have so many questions for all of them, and like my favorite thing to do is like, hey, come over, let's have a drink.
Yeah.
What the hell are you doing here? Why'd you come here? And then I try to kind of see like our state the way that the people coming here do, and I don't know if that helps or hurts, but and then I don't want to be like a doomsdayer with the newcomers. But I was just saying that I've been looking at property in Minnesota because like they don't have all these hurricanes. They don't have so it's a very complicated relationship. That's like I feel like it's a constant reevaluation, especially having children. Because I think it's one thing to be like, oh, well, I'm going to stay here, but then I think it's a very different thing to kind of tie children here and have them root themselves and root their lives and stuff here. And that's I think the big junction that I'm out of like, what is it? What do you do? Like, what do you do in that scenario? And do you keep reinvesting so much of your energy and your money and your time and everything into a place that is then stricken by another hurricane in a year or two, and I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard.
You have this line, I just want to read it. I don't know if everybody can hear me. That really stood out to me, speaking of Florida, which is so much of what I know, this heat and hurricanes, the tumultuousness of all of it. It's like my mother, accepting her for all she is, accepting this place for all it is. The tables turn and it becomes the place you're most comfortable in, the place you come to identify with, which I thought was really beautiful.
I read that?
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I was like, oh, is that Tyler? Yeah, no, I mean, it is. It's like, it's what I know, so like I can't, like, I don't know how I'm going to function or how I would function in snow. Like, that's totally foreign to me. But and I do, like, I have so many Filipino friends who have like eczema and stuff because they live in New York, and I'm like, you just need to come down to the tropics where our people belong, So, and that was the big reason, my mother chose to come here. Is she graduated top of her class from the best nursing school in Manila. She could have gone anywhere. She had friends going to San Francisco, to LA, to New York, to places that have much infinitely larger Filipino populations. And she was like, nope, I don't want to be cold. So she told the placement officer who she was working with that she would go to either San Diego, Arizona, or Florida, and that was it. That she did not want to be cold at all. And so they found her a placement in Fort Myers Community Hospital in Robert E. Lee County. So, yeah. But I always wonder, like, if we had ended up, somewhere maybe a little bit more diverse, just how different things would have been. But, it was not the case. And, I had an interesting childhood, but like, I don't look back at my childhood with like too much sadness, which maybe is hard to believe reading the book, but I really don't. Like, I had like some pretty amazing friends, all things considered. I had like, this like amazing support system that has like come from all of that trauma and everything. And, I also I do like the heat, so.
I have a question for you. So I think too, because we're, growing up in Florida, it's like I'll always come back here and my family's here and we were talking about this, So there's really, in my conception of what's happening, I've lived elsewhere, but I know that I'll always come back here because my family they can't leave, like financially, they're here, right? That's not my question. One of my problems with the stories and narratives of Florida is that people don't think we have a history in this state. And that my question for you is, there's a lot of in food culture, like there's no Florida food, or there's no culture of Florida of food, right? Which we know that isn't true, but I'm just wondering from your expertise if maybe you could talk a little bit, I'm just super interested in that, if you could talk about a little bit of that and how that has influenced your understanding of the state, or just, your writing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was a food writer for almost 20 years. If there's, everyone's like, is there, especially for our part, like the west coast of Florida, I feel like mullet dip, smoked mullet dip. Like if I had to pick like a food that like defined our area, like that's it. 'Cause that's the crap fish that you don't sell at the market because it doesn't travel well. It's too oily, and so the fishermen, it's bycatch basically. The fishermen smoke it right there at the docks, and that's like what the locals eat because it just doesn't travel very well. And you know, at least God bless Matt Lachey and Pine Island because they've been ravaged. But you know that you go there and like that's everywhere has like their claim on like the best smoked mullet dip, or you know there's mullet festival and there's you know, and it's just one of those quirky little things that's really not celebrated outside of our little patch of like the Gulf Coast. Although I've heard it's kind of big in the Panhandle too, the mullet, and like the fish fries and things like that. But I mean, I definitely think it's our food culture is at its heart like seafood based. But then you can also make arguments, you know, for like, I mean, the Italians and Germans, you know, like they got to, well, I mean, you can make arguments for the Miccosukee and Seminole and, you know, all the various different foodways that they've lost over the years. But it's, I mean, it's really an interesting, just like melange of, you know, of who's kind of in control at whatever given time, or who's, you know, who's been tricked into buying a little parcel of the swamp at any given time. But I was interviewing an Italian restaurant. He owns Ariani's in Cape Coral, and him and his wife were honeymooning in Miami. And there's a guy just like strolling along the beach, and he was like, "Hey, you want a helicopter ride? Free helicopter ride?" And they're like, he's like, you know, like this broke guy from New York, and he's like, "Yeah, sure, I'll take a free helicopter ride." And it was like, it was over Cape Coral. They had just raised all of Cape Coral, which, you know, Cape Coral is fascinating. Like if you have time to read about the history of Cape Coral, it's fascinating. Like they just, two guys went in there and just plowed down everything, and then dug a bunch of canals to try to make it the Venice of Florida, even though we have a Venice, and then sold it off to people like sight unseen. And so it was the Cape Coral developers were going to Miami, flying people over and telling them like, pick your lot, $1,500, pick your lot, point it out, we'll get it to you. And so he bought like 2 or 3 pieces of property in Cape Coral and opened the city's first restaurant, which was, you know, it wasn't called Ariani at the time, it was something else. And he's like, people down here didn't, like back then in the late 60s, early 70s, Italian food was considered ethnic. And so he had like to tell people what, you know, lasagna was, like what, like why his sauces were so spicy and stuff like that. So, you know, all the foodways and like how they find them are all just like microcosms of the people and the populations that end up filtering down here too, which is really fascinating to me. But
So when you were still writing this as a cookbook, what would have been your favorite dish that you planned to highlight?
I mean, that was also kind of a part of the reason that it became a memoir, is because like there was a part of me that was like, why don't I have more Filipino recipes, you know, like why don't I know more of my mother's cooking? And like, one, she was not like the most like hands-on mom. She was very comfortable just like making her food and like serving it and not really telling us much about it. And we were also as kids like, okay, yeah, cool, you know, we'll be playing video games or watching TV shows or whatever. And so, but then as an adult, it was like, well, I cooked in restaurants for a decade, and I probably knew Mexican and Latin food better than I know Filipino food. And why is that? And so then that became kind of like an exploration point for the memoir of like, wait, what are these, like, what, you know, am I intentionally not learning Filipino food? You know, was I intentionally avoiding it because that meant having to talk to my mother, you know, or deal with my family or whatever. But I do have, I have a very solid adobo recipe that's, you know, so adobo is just like a very Filipino traditional dish. It's built on black pepper, vinegar, like that's the basis of it, bay leaves. It's very simple but super quick and easy. And then my mom's lumpia. I worked with her. That was the one thing that I was like, let's make lumpia. Like for myself and for my kids' sake, I was like, we need to figure out the lumpia at least. And then, so yeah, those were the as far as I had gotten in like really developed recipes, and I had a bunch of other ones that I had, you know, just kind of toyed around with and stuff.
Right.
But yeah.
What questions do all of you have? I'm sure we have audience questions, and I want to talk at the time.
Well, I'm a native also, and I would love to tell people I moved north to get here because I'm from Miami. So for me, I think seafood is definitely the Floridian thing. Then of course in Miami, you know, the Cuban influence, all the other Latin countries and everything. But are you familiar with the market of the mullet, the botarga? It's the mullet roe.
Oh, wow.
And I met a gentleman many years ago that was getting into that market, and he was exporting it all over the world.
Oh, wow.
And it was from, you know, Bradenton.
Oh, that's funny.
So
No,
you might want to check into
yeah,
that.
and it's still here? It's still operational, Botarga?
Well,
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know
Yeah.
if he is, but I mean, I met him several years ago. I'm
Yeah.
assuming it is because the market is really good for it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I know.
And then the mango part, when I saw the title of your book and everything, we had a home in Miami. The elder had found a grove of mango trees, like over 4 blocks. We had a corner lot, had 17 mango trees.
Oh.
And to this day, I have never had a better
Oh, I know.
mango than I had when we lived in that house. They
Yeah.
were like bigger.
Mm.
They were so juicy and so delicious, but we could barely keep up with 17 mango
Yeah.
trees, right? And then when they fall, and
Yes.
the squirrels come
And the
everybody
raccoons
else
come,
comes,
yeah.
and
Or
then
they get them on the
flies.
tree, which is when my mom would get
Right,
upset.
Right. Now we used to have Latin guys coming through the neighborhood sometimes just asking if they could take them off, and of course with 17 mango trees, we
Please.
always did. But to this day, I've not had a good mango since.
Yeah, the Florida mango is actually a pretty fascinating story because for a long time, it was in the Miami Herald has written really good stories about this that I'm going to try to now synthesize based off of my imperfect memory. But for a long time, my mom called them the Cubans mangoes, which I wrote about in the book a little bit. But so they would bring all these mango trees from India and from the Philippines and from South Asia. They would bring them to Florida thinking that they could get them to thrive here, and they couldn't get them to grow. And the problem was something about the rootstock. Like the rootstock of those plants just wouldn't take in our really sandy, loamy soil. But the Cuban rootstock and the Cuban mango trees produce not very tasty mangoes. They call them turpentine mangoes because they taste like turpentine. But they have hardy rootstock that will grow in our soil. And so a guy in Miami in Coral Gables figured out that if you take the Cuban mango tree and you use their roots and then you graft on whatever delicious mangoes you want to, you will get not the mango you grafted on. You will get some weird Florida hybrid that all became all the different varieties that we have, like the Kent and the Haydens and there's all these different specific to Florida varieties that are hybrids of the turpentine mangoes along with whatever has been grafted onto their roots. But then if you propagate those mangoes, they can grow after the grafting. So it's all interesting, and I don't know enough about plants or biology to totally understand it.
I know.
Yeah. So that's how but then, like, my mom will still tell you, like, the best of her mangoes does not hold a candle to, like, a mango that's grown in the Philippines. She's like, and then, like, my friends from India and Egypt and stuff, everyone has, like, and it's such an immigrant thing of, like, well, the mangoes in Cairo are better than the best mango you can get here, or the mangoes in, wherever are better than anything you can find here. Yeah.
Anyone else in it?
You've alluded on Instagram and or your newsletter, I don't remember, that you've got more in the works.
Yeah.
Is there anything we can talk about?
Yeah, I just signed the contract, so I think I don't know, don't go telling a bunch of people, but I have a children's book coming out with Lee and Low Books, which is like this amazing independent publisher. And it's tentatively titled Penny and Lola Pick a Mango because we're just writing that one until the wheels fall off. And so that's a picture book. I imagine now that the contract is signed, it won't be out for a couple years because it takes a while for the illustrator because I can't draw, to do all that work. And then I am working on, so one of the beauties of my editor for the Mango Tree at Little Brown, Vivian, we got into like a very fortunate situation where when we went on submission with the book, there were multiple publishers interested in it. And they had very different visions. One was like, there's too much childhood. I wanted to really focus more on your time as a restaurant critic, and your time like pretending to be this Jean LaBeouf character, which we haven't even got to talk about too much. And so when I worked at the news press, I wrote all of my reviews. Any restaurant reviews were written under this pen name, Jean LeBouf. And so one editor wanted to focus much more on that and like trim away a lot of the childhood stuff. Another editor wanted to do like an alternating timeline where it was like childhood Annabelle and then adult Annabelle and this like overarching quest for identity, which was interesting. And then Vivian, the editor I ended up with, was like, I think you have 2 books here. I think you have this really solid coming of age mother-daughter memoir in The Mango Tree. And then I think you have a second book that's really more focused on your time as a restaurant critic, and I think those are both good stories worth telling. We really hope she gave me a 2-book deal.
Hello.
She didn't.
That's where that was going.
I think I asked my agent, I was like, does this mean it's a 2-book deal? She's like, I hope so. She's like, nope. But they have the option on that book, and I'm working on that book right now. But it's not anywhere near having a date or anything like that, but it is in the works, which is fun and exciting. So, and then everything, speaking of Instagram, my mother's health has not been great, and that has like inspired this like fiction writing in me that I was like, ooh, look at this, you don't have to tell the truth. Just like make up scenarios and figure out how to fix them however you want. So that's been interesting to kind of dabble in, to kind of process all this stuff that's going on with my mom currently. But so who knows, that might be something one day. But yeah. Do you have anything in the works?
Well, yes, I do. I've actually been writing fiction too.
Oh, okay.
To process like the death of my grandmother, like whatever, but it's like a romantic comedy, so who knows? You know what, I know, right? But like, I cut a lot of the grandma stuff out because I'm like, well, that was for me. But no, it's a romantic comedy. It's a queer romantic comedy about a greeting card maker. I just finished the first draft, like the revision. My agent has it right now. So yeah, I want to write something fun, and like making up stuff is so fun. You know, it really, really
I was
is.
like, we're not bound by like the constraints of
truth.
reality.
Yeah, and I'm working on another collection of poetry as well, which is like, it was like weird AI like paintings.
Love it. Yeah.
I have another question about, can you talk about how the book has affected your relationship with your mom?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so in a very, dark turn of events, my mother, her health has like taken a nosedive in the last couple of years. So there was definitely a time where I was like talking to my brother and sister of like, and they're like, what is mom gonna do if she reads this? And we were all like, we've never seen our mother pick up a book, like one, unless it was like a nursing book or like a manual or a study guide, or if she had to renew her license or something like that. That was the only time we ever saw her read. Which isn't to say she wouldn't have read it. So yeah, in this kind of weird twist, she has vascular dementia, which she was diagnosed in 2018, and then it was kind of like, us figuring it out, and then it got really bad, where, she's had other vascular problems. She's had a stroke and some heart attacks in the last year. Like if she could read a book, I would be thrilled in a way. But she has held the book. She still thinks it's a cookbook some days, because when I first started talking to her about it, I was asking her mainly for recipes and like, things like that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think she'll ever read it. The person I was honestly most worried about reading it was my sister. And she and I have like a very different relationship with our mother. My sister does not talk to our mom anymore. They haven't spoken in at least 4 or 5, with some exceptions. They've not really been in contact in the last 5 years. And I thought that my sister would think that I took it too easy on my mom in the book. And so when we had kind of final, one of the very first arcs, she was the first person that I was like, hey, I need you to read this. If I was like, it's memoir, it's not autobiography, like I don't have to have a sister, I was like, I can change details, I can change whatever. And she read it in 12 hours, and like she texted me back the next morning, and my sister will send these like 50-page missives of texts, and I was like, I could see that it was longer than a regular text, and I was just like sweating a little bit as I was getting ready to read it. And she was basically like, this is great, and this is the story you had to write about our childhood. I was like, okay, that works.
Yeah.
We can make that work.
Yeah.
Yes. I just really connected to the book as a coming-of-age story. I'm a native Sarasotan, Filipino father, almost completely Irish mother. And really, your journey of having times where you didn't feel like you quite belonged here, you went to the Philippines, you didn't quite belong there, was, such a parallel feeling for me, and thank you for that. But I'm curious what your relationship is to the Philippines now.
Yeah. So at the very, the epilogue, the last chapter of the book is us going back, me going back with my kids, which was really important to me. And it became more and more important, especially as my mother's health kind of started declining. But that trip that we took in 2022 was supposed to happen in 2015. We were planning for it, getting ready for it. At the time, I thought it was just going to be me and my mom because the kids were really young back then. And then she got arrested, and then she had to serve 5 years of probation because she refused to go in front of a judge and say she was sorry. So she ended up doing every single day of those 5 years. And that put us into 2020, and 2020 was like, yeah, screw off, like you're not going anywhere. And so then it got bumped back to 2022 because that was when quarantines were easing and everything. And it was like every time there was like a delay, I was like, we have to go as soon as we can. Because I wanted my mom to be there still. I wanted the kids to, I went when I was really young. I went when I was like 2 or 3 years old, but when I went when I was 11, that was such just an integral memory. And it was so life shifting, everything shifted, and just seeing oh my gosh, what we have here is not normal. And I wanted my kids to experience that. And also just to meet the family. We have so much family over there still. And it was wonderful. It was amazing. And I was worried about, so many things. Have we been gone too long? Will they be upset that the kids haven't been here yet? Will they not? But it was just the most wonderful trip, and the kids loved it. They're like, can we go again this year? And I'm like, it's really expensive. It is not a cheap trip, so let's just give it some time. But they would go. It was really heartening to kind of see that connection flow through to another generation, and be okay, it's still, they present as white children. I have very blonde children, which is mind blowing to me. But they loved it there, and they had so much fun. So it was it was really cool.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, Molly.
Okay, so as you were writing this, being a friend and reading it, I have this fangirl. I feel I just adore you on a different level. And it's probably weird because you don't feel that, no, I don't mean it in weird, but did you, as you were writing this, did you realize your people were going to see a different side of you that you weren't? Did you even think of that? Or did it happen after the book was written?
Everyone says when you're writing, they're you just need to write the story you've got to write and worry about all that stuff later, and so I did. I was yeah, just follow those advice that they're telling me in the workshops. And then, it's cross those bridges when you come to them, but then the bridges get closer and you're oh, it's time to cross that bridge now. And it's terrifying. But yeah, no, it was a lot to kind of wrap your head around, because I'm not the most and these are not things you talk about at cocktail parties,
right.
This is not hey, I want to talk about the time my uncle hung himself in the garage. That doesn't come up very naturally. So even my husband, even people very close to me, there was stuff that they read in here that were wait, what? And I was yeah. But Beth Wynn, she teaches at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and she is maybe the quietest person you'll ever meet in your life, but she writes these just shatteringly visceral memoirs about growing up Vietnamese American in this country and everything, and her family and the tumultuous nature of all of it. And she had this amazing advice, and she was at some point, this thing that you're writing is no longer she's it's always your story. It'll always be your story, it's always your baby. But then at some point it also becomes the work. And as a writer, your job is to share your work. And so if you stop thinking about it as you're sharing your most intimate details, you are, but you're also sharing your work. Mm-hmm. And she's that's how I get over the fact of being this very introverted, shy person, but then sharing my work is my job, and so that is what I do. And I was that's a really interesting way of putting it, because that is kind of what it is. It is this work, and you hope that people connect with it, and you hope that they see some part of themselves or their family or their kooky grandmother or mother in it, and that brings something to them, and that's why you share it. So that was like, let's go. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I cheated when I did the Audible.
Oh, the Audible, yeah.
Yeah.
It's 10 hours of me.
Yeah. So, having done that, like, it was very special having you read it or present it. How did that did it change anything for you? Was it different to do it collectively in that way and condense time?
Yeah.
What was the output of that? Like, I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
Yeah, so the audiobook, have you ever recorded any of your stuff for like audio?
Some stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Poetry's a little different though.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was grueling. It was like 36 hours of like just sitting in the studio to get the 10-hour book. So, it was 3 hours to every hour about. And a lot of it was just the producer saying, slow down, take a breath, slow down. Or me mispronouncing some word. I had no idea that clapboard is not pronounced clapboard.
Oh, I
It's
didn't know that.
clabbered, clabbered siding.
Sounds wrong.
I know, it sounds wrong. I apparently say toilet instead of toilet. Toilet. So you learn all these little things about yourself, but it does also put like the story into like new perspective, because then you're like actually kind of inhabiting the characters. And so there were parts I was like expecting to cry that I didn't, and then there were parts I was not expecting to cry and I was like destroyed by. And a lot of it was like trying to be my mother, and trying to like deal with like all the stuff that she was dealing with. Like there was parts where we had to like go take a break, and like I had to like empty out a box of Kleenexes because I was just like like a hot mess. And I recorded it in Cape Coral, and like the sound guy was like a dude named Drew, and he was just like, he's like, "You okay?" I was like, "I just need a minute, Drew." But it was very interesting. And then the acknowledgments tore me up too, like reading the acknowledgments. So it's funny because a few friends have listened to it, and they're like, man, I cried a little bit in certain parts, but then I got to the acknowledgments and I was bawling. And I was like, that's because I was bawling during the acknowledgments. And even though they edited it, because I listened to it, and I was like, can you tell that I have snot like running down my face? And I don't think you can, but I think there's something humans that, that you can tell when somebody's in distress. And a handful of people have been like, I cannot make it through your acknowledgments. Your reading of your acknowledgments. And I was like, yeah, thank you. Because also, neither could I. It was awful. But, yeah.
Just hearing your voice reading it, I was like, oh, I was like crying. It was really special.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah. Well, we've
Thank you so
already
much.
gone over, which is fine. But I want to leave some time for
book
books.
signings.
Exactly, yeah. But thank you both so much, and for all of your successes too. It's so fun to see. So we'll give them another. Yes.